Alright, the first package for PixelBOX Episode 7 is a relatively small affair, and you know what? I'm just going to brute force this one. Who needs cutting tools? More packaging! More CPUs! This is a Athlon XP 2400 Plus, and yeah, another 2400 Plus. The reason being that the other one was a mobile 2400 Plus. This is the plain old desktop version. And the reason I got this is because the mobile version didn't work out the way I was hoping it would. It just isn't very compatible with the motherboard that I want to use, which makes sense because it was never meant to be. And, you know, it's not an overclocking beast. And, you know, I might use it in a future project at some point on, you know, a newer, more robust socket A motherboard. But this is a good option for, you know, if you're building a socket A system, you know, that has a universal AGP slot. You want to be able to support, you know, Voodoo 3 and Voodoo 4, Voodoo 5 cards, as well as other older AGP 2X cards, as well as newer AGP 4X cards. You're going to need a CPU like this if you want a lot of CPU overhead. And the reason is that this is one of the fastest Athlon XP CPUs you can get for the 266 megahertz front side bus. There's only one faster than this, and that is a 2600 Plus. And guess what? Anything that is the fastest processor on a given platform is going to be at a premium. It's going to cost, it's going to cost a lot of money, basically, is what I'm trying to get at. But, you know, a 2400 Plus is like a little bit less performance, like minuscule amount of less performance. It's like on the clock speed, this one runs at 2 gigahertz. The 2600 Plus runs at 2.1 gigahertz. Minuscule difference. And these can be found for like $10 if, you know, you type in the actual like model number. You can actually find these really cheap. The 2600, not so much. So yeah, we're going to put this into my 98 system and finally do that overhaul that I keep wanting to do for that platform. But anyway, on to the next package. Alright, so we got a big one here, and we're going to attempt to use the built-in tabs to open this thing because they never work. I'm shocked. Wow. What is this, like sound dampening foam? This is interesting. Alright, so here we have the first ATI card I've gotten in quite a while. Yeah, this is a Radeon HD 2900 XT. This is often referred to as the GeForce FX from ATI. Because it had a number of problems when it came out, released in 2007. It was competing with a card from 2006, and not even the top of the line card from 2006. This was a $400 graphics card that was competing against the 8800 GTS, the 640 meg version of that, and did not compete against the more high-end 8800 GTX. So, it was largely deemed a failure because ATI literally had no response to the 8800 GTX. This was the best they could come up with. And it ran extremely hot and consumed a lot of power. And given that this was the 2900 XT and they had previously released cards with the XTX suffix at the end, Many people expected them to have an XTX version of this card, which never happened, did not exist. It was in the works. They certainly, I'm sure, wanted to release that. And it was supposed to utilize GDDR4 memory, similar to the X1950 XTX, which ended up being one of the only cards, one of the very few cards to use GDDR4. It was a very short-lived memory standard. But later on down the line, ATI did stealthily release a card, a version of the 2900 XT that used GDDR4. It was simply the 1 gigabyte version of this. This is a 512 megabyte version. This is the more commonly found version of the 2900 XT. The 1 gig version is actually very, very rare. So it's hard to come by. It's often sold very expensively unless the seller doesn't know what they have or doesn't know the value or the rarity. And you know what? That's fine by me. I don't need that version of the card. This was the more common version, the one that came out first. This was the one that is more historically relevant to me anyway. It did not benefit from the bandwidth of GDDR4 because this one already had more bandwidth than it could use. It was one of the very first, if not the first card to have a 512-bit memory interface hooked up to just traditional GDDR3 memory. And the number of ROPs was only 16, which was the same as the past few generations, going back to the X800 XT and so on. So yeah, it wasn't a huge amount of fill rate, which did not saturate the bandwidth all that much. And to top it all off, it didn't even really properly do multi-sampling AA, which would have benefited the most from that amount of memory bandwidth. It used some other type of anti-aliasing, which was more akin to FXAA from nowadays, the more shader-based AA methods. So that's something I'm eager to play around with. And honestly, I think that's enough history. We're just going to go ahead and test this one out and see if it works. Real quick, I just wanted to show a comparison, just for fun, of the 2900 XT next to the X1950 XT. You can see that the 2900 XT is very, very slightly longer, but I do find the X1950 to be much more attractive looking in its overall cooler design. I guess you could say it's cooler looking. I'm not seeing anything on the screen. Okay, that was just the motherboard being a little finicky. Ah, bummer. I gotta get a new driver. Alright. We have good, solid rendering. No artifacts. The fan is actually very quiet on this cooler, which is nice. Let's see if I can monitor the temps. Oh god, it just kicked on to... Alright, it just went to like full fan speed all of a sudden. That's crazy. Holy cow. That's as bad as the 5800 Ultra. Alright, well I couldn't get ATI Trade Tools to work with this card and the drivers, but I realized that the fan speed was kicking up really high because this little button right here was clicked. Once you do that, then it enters manual control, which has it ramped up to 63. I don't know why. I don't remember playing with that, but whatever. Unclicking that switches it back to driver-controlled auto defaults. And I want to go ahead and get the on-screen display for the clock speeds for the GPU and the memory, and I'm going to run a full screen 3D application to see if the clock speeds are correct. Okay, so yeah, just on the title screen here, you can see the clocks did indeed ramp up to full. So I think running a windowed 3D application was still clocking down to just 2D mode, I guess, low power state. And, you know, of course, full screen, you run at the full performance. But then you do actually hear the fan now a little bit. So it's not really all that quiet. It was never known to be quiet. But let's go ahead and go into my typical Halo map that I used for benchmarking. But anyway, yeah, it's working fine, so that's great. And this is a very good card to have in the collection just for the sake of you know, benchmarking in the future, hopefully against a comparable graphics card. And it's just a very interesting card to me for having kind of a storied history with ATI, and just in terms of a company being kind of on top of their game and releasing a card like the 2900 XT being a huge letdown in many ways. Yeah, kind of similar story to the NVIDIA FX series, isn't it? So let's move on to the next package. Okay, this next package is something that is incredibly important and long overdue and necessary for the channel. What kind of graphics card is this? Oh, it's not a graphics card at all. This is the Avermedia Game Broadcast HD with VGA, which means that this is a very high quality and highly sought after capture card for people who run YouTube channels or, you know, things of that nature, such as myself, who want to show footage from, say, vintage graphics cards that only have VGA output. But it does have HDMI as well, which means digital sources, including DVI output, will work just fine. So this is really exciting. This will lead to a huge improvement in the quality of my videos. Because I'll be able to actually show rather than simply explain what graphics cards do in games, the behavior of rendering. And for example, like in my Ray Theory Max video, I was complaining about there being stuttering issues, but I wasn't able to actually sufficiently show that unless I just pointed the camera at the screen, which does not capture all the frames. It adds its own motion blur. It's suboptimal to say the least, but it's something I've had to resort to for many of my videos. And if it's not that, then it's having to use Fraps or some other software-based capture solution. Not an ideal solution for every situation. And despite that, I think, you know, the quality of my videos has been fairly decent given the limitations of my equipment and my lack of experience making videos prior to that. But this is definitely going to help. And so I'm really eager to get this going and to start using it for my videos. And so I'm going to get right to testing it out. Well, I didn't show it, but I have the card installed in my main desktop system, and I went ahead and routed the cables over to my retro system, which I moved temporarily over here. And in order to do this, while still being able to use my monitor, I do have to use a graphics card that supports a dual display out, which fortunately a lot of them do. So I just need to configure the display to clone, you can see on here, and that way I have it mirrored to over here. It's the Avermedia software, and you can see it's up and running. let's go ahead and start some sort of application. I have currently installed a Quadro FX 4400, which is just simply the last card that I had in there. And we're going to go ahead and play a game of some sort. How about Serious Sam? And now we will capture the footage straight off of the card. Hey, wait a minute, I don't have to film off of the monitor anymore. Now here you can see, this is among one of the first tests that I made with this card, capturing a game. And, you know, the quality is pretty decent. After using it for a few weeks, you know, I noticed the options to tweak the image quality aren't very extensive. You can only do up to 20 megabits per second. And it has limits in terms of resolution as well. Like it can only do 60 frames per second at 720p, for example. At 1080, you have to limit it to 30 frames per second. I also noticed that it has quite a few limitations in terms of compatibility. Those who have tried to capture video using old ATI cards know that sometimes it can be pretty annoying and difficult, and yeah, unfortunately this card is no exception. I have a lot of issues trying to capture video with older ATI cards. In fact, it pretty much limits me to only being able to use X1000 series cards and newer, which is a huge amount of ATI cards that I cannot capture directly. So this is definitely, unfortunately, not the end-all solution to my capture needs. I'm going to have to keep looking elsewhere. I will use this card in the meantime for NVIDIA cards and newer ATI slash AMD cards. But yeah, it's a little bit disappointing that it's not more versatile than it is. The quality is acceptable, I would say, but you could definitely do a lot better. The main advantage with this one is that it has VGA capture, so that's the big selling point, honestly. And the thing is, you can actually work around that with capture cards that don't have direct VGA input. So that's what I'll be looking at later on. All right, this next this next package comes from a viewer. This is another donation, which is really awesome. The person that sent this goes by the name Vincent. So what do you say we open it? Alright, there it is. As you can see, it is a GeForce 9600 GT. Of course, this is from EVGA. They put the little E in front of there, but nonetheless, it's pretty recognizable. Yeah, this is the 512 meg card here, the superclocked edition as well, which is pretty nice. And yeah, I'm starting to get a collection of very early stages of some more mainstream-oriented cards, and he freely offered this one to me, so that's awesome. And yeah, this was a very good mainstream card back in it was 2007, 2008, somewhere around there, based on the the original GeForce 8 series architecture. Of course, went on to be branded as the 9000 series cards as well, either through rebranding or through future iterations. But they were mostly all the same architecture. Now, whereas a full 8800 GTX would have 128 stream processors. An 8800 GT would have 112, and a 8800 GTS would have, at least the first ones, would have 96 stream processors. This one has 64. So 64 versus the full 128 means this should, in theory, give you exactly half the performance, roughly. But I doubt it actually works out that way, because this was a very, very efficient, very excellent performing card for its time. So let's go ahead and give it a test. Alright, so we got the drivers installed, and real quickly, here we are rendering 3D. So the default clock of a 9600 GT is 650 megahertz on the core, 1625 megahertz on the shaders, and 1800 megahertz effectively for the memory. This is a super clocked version of it, so let's see here. 675 on the core for this one, which is a 25 megahertz overclock on just the core. Memory looks to be about the same as a stock one, and then you see the shader clock is 650, so that's 25 megahertz overclocked on the shaders as well. So definitely has a little bit of an overclock, not a big one, and does appear to be working. Real quick, let's load up MSI Afterburner and just see what the temperature is. So it's sitting at 41 idle. We're going to leave that on, and then we're going to run 3D Mark 05. Now, a lot of people ask me when I receive a new graphics card why I don't immediately take the cooler off, clean it all off, replace the thermal paste, and so on, and then test the card. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, if the card works, it will at least turn on, and it will at least render 3D for a while, and even if it has thermal issues, you can see symptoms that are consistent with thermal issues. Typically, the card will render 3D for a while, and then you'll start to see artifacts, and possibly even the card crashing, unless the cooler is just completely broken or something's completely wrong with it. Then you may not get to the desktop. But the other reason I don't bother doing all of that is because, well, I simply don't have a lot of thermal paste, and it's not something that I even think about buying. I should probably get some more, but if a card works and the temperature is fine, I don't make it a habit of replacing the thermal paste unless there is an issue. It just doesn't seem necessary to me. It's wasteful, especially since thermal paste is, at least good thermal paste, is really not cheap. So, yeah, I kind of prefer to go without. Alright, 22,615. Excellent score. I'm going to look at the temps down here. Let's see. Go away. So it was getting to 63, 64, 66, 67, 68, up to 69 looks like it was the peak temperature. So the temps are actually pretty good. So I'm not too worried about that. I mean, that's fairly average, I would say. It's a single slot cooler. Now let's see how this score compares to my other cards. Let's see, 3D Mark 05. How about a X1950 XTX? Yeah, way higher. This is 22,615. The X1950 XTX got 14,377. Let's see here. Compared to an 8800 GTX, is it half the score? No, it's not half the score. In fact, they're almost the same. Look at this. 23,249 versus 22,615. That's interesting. I wonder if there's some CPU limitations there. I'm not sure. Anyway, suffice it to say, the 9600 GT is fully working. And best of all, yeah, this was a very generous donation from Vincent. So again, thank you very much. I'm always incredibly grateful to receive anything like this. And, you know, if any of you guys have anything that you want to unload, you can leave a comment down below. Or you can email me at pixelpipes@gmail.com, and I'll certainly try to get back with you. Alright, and now we have what I think will be the last package for this episode of PixelBOX. Alright. Sweet. Yeah, this is a HD 3850 AGP. Widely considered to be the fastest AGP graphics card. Not the last AGP graphics card ever made, but certainly one of the last high-end ones, because you got to remember 3850 was still up there in performance when it was new. Originally, the 3850 as a PCI Express card came out in 2007. This one, I don't know that it actually made it out that same year. May have came out a little bit later, maybe 2008. But regardless, this was an awesome way to get DirectX 10, actually 10.1 support with a unified shader architecture, a fairly modern graphics card in an older computer. And yeah, needless to say, there's a lot of video potential with this card for sure. I've definitely gotten a lot of requests to cover the fastest AGP graphics card since doing the fastest PCI graphics card videos. So that's something I'll be looking towards in the near future. Got a really great deal on this, though. These typically go for an expensive price, but this one was mislabeled and in the listing. But of course, the pictures did all the talking, and so it was a really good price. Just to add to the anachronism of this card, you know, this fairly modern PCI Express GPU on an AGP bus also had an 8-pin PCI Express power connector. And at the moment, the system that I have to test this in, my Windows XP system, only has a 6-pin connector. So I need something like this. Yeah, so that will work really nicely. And of course allow me to test this graphics card in my Athlon 64 system. So what do you say we go ahead and do that? Alright, so we're all booted up now. Drivers have loaded up just fine. There's no bad noise or anything coming from the cooler. You can see it detects 320 stream processors, 512 megabytes memory, 670 megahertz on the core, 830 megahertz on the memory, which would be doubled for the double data rate. You can see all that same information is detected here as well. Now let's load up a quick 3D test. And here we see it's rendering just fine. So obviously this system is completely bottlenecking this card. I mean, it's an Athlon 64 dual core running at 2.8 gigahertz. It predates the graphics card by a good deal, and really I need a Core 2 Duo rig to really do this graphics card justice and to really show what it's capable of. And so unfortunately, in order for me to really do a video about this card, I will have to acquire a new platform, one that has AGP and support for a Core 2 Duo. And so that will be something that will be coming in the future at some point. I just can't say when exactly. But at least I can test it and see that the card is working. I just can't really show its true potential with this rig. But yeah, I'm really happy to have this card. So once again, thank you for watching another episode of PixelBOX. And hopefully we get some good stuff in the next one. So stay locked to this channel for that, as well as many more videos as well. So thank you very much. I'm Nathan, and this has been PixelPipes.